Hello everyone, my name is Lowko and welcome to some more StarCraft 2 Legacy of the Void. Now in this video I want to be talking about why Zerg vs Protoss is as frustrating as many of you will have heard it is, but some of you may not completely understand exactly why that is. Now in this specific game I actually just played this. Game, I recorded it, but I only recorded audio and I forgot to record my screen. That happens every now and then when you're a content creator. But anyways, I figured this was the best example game I could have gotten. In this specific game, my opponent is gonna go for a 2-base all-in. I scout very early on exactly what it is all about. I got all the necessary tools to deal with it, but I just sort of died to it anyway. And there's a couple of reasons why, and I mentioned that while recording this video as well, that was indeed going to be the case, but you know, like I mentioned, I forgot to record the screen, so here we are. Anyways, so in this specific game, like I mentioned, my opponent is going to go for a 2-base all-in, and I'm going to be scouting very heavily. I get a very early overlord speed, I get early zerking speed, I look around the map, try and find all the proxy pylons, try and snipe down the probe that is actually dealing with it all, and we find out very quickly what my opponent is going for. Now, I decide to go for the counterplay that I have heard most of the pro gamers talk about, and that is going to be +1/+1 Zerglings and a lot of roaches. Now, there's a couple of changes that they've made to Protoss in the early game. Most notably, they now have a warp prism that can warp in units on a 2-second counter. So basically, it takes 2 seconds to warp in units. That means that they are immediately into the game, whereas warping in from a pylon takes 16 seconds. It does still lower the cooldown of the warp gates while that is going on, but it lowers the cooldown of it significantly. Or it lowers the time it takes to warp in significantly if you warp in from a warp prism. Now on top of that, the mothership core got basically a bigger circle. So right now it takes a little bit to charge up, but the slow amount of it is much bigger, and you know, the circle is a little bigger as well. And then on top of that, we got the Immortal. The Immortal now have a barrier ability instead of the hardened shields. And what the barrier ability basically does, it neglects any kind of damage for a couple of seconds. Which means that if you are a Zerg player and you're, let's say, target firing down the Immortal very quickly and trying to kill it very quickly, if the hardened shield is being activated, which it automatically is because it's an auto cast, you need to basically stop attacking and then wait a second and then attack again on the Immortal. So it just makes the micro a little more difficult. But the most important reason, and this is something that most of you will probably be already aware of, the most important reason why certain all-ins and certain early game plays and mid game and late game plays as well are very difficult is the Adept. The Adept is a new unit that got added into the Protoss arsenal of weapons, and it's an extremely strong unit. It's relatively cheap, it's 100 minerals, 25 gas, and it basically replaced the Zealot and the Stalker in any kind of 2-base all-ins. Now, I'm not 100% certain if they are overpowered. A lot of pro gamers seem to agree that they are overpowered, and a lot of them seem to agree that they are totally fine. It seems like mostly the Protoss players think they are completely fine. I am not 100% certain of it. I do know that there are still Zerg players in the top of the line Grandmaster League, so there's plenty of things that I can do, you know, in order to improve myself. And even though I've been getting a little bit salty lately when playing Zerg vs Protoss, I do know very well that I am not playing this matchup perfect either. But I felt like I played in this game pretty good. So basically what my opponent is going for is a 2-base all-in with Adepts and with Immortals, and he will follow, or he's basically gonna go Immortal Sentry, just like the good old Immortal Sentry, and then he actually follows it up with a, hold on, I will pause the game here for a second. He will follow it up, instead of warping in Stalkers and Zealot, he will follow it up with warping in only Adepts. Now, in this specific game, I have already found the probe that was microing around. I am trying to scout out exactly what is going on. This Overlord will end up falling to the new Photon Overcharge that is now happening on the Mothership Core on 25 energy. But I have another Overlord ready to fly into the main base, and I will end up finding this robotics facility right here. Now, at this point, I know very well, you know, once I see the building, I know very well what is going on. And I know that I will be able to get away with a couple of drones in order to beat this. Now, the best way of dealing with the early game aggression, I found, is by getting the +1/+1 upgrades. If you manage to get the +1/+1 upgrades going on the Zerglings, you oftentimes can actually carry them to the late game and go for Immortal Sentry later on. Or Immortal Sentry, sorry. You go for Ultralisk Zergling later on, which is an extremely powerful composition. Now, in Heart of the Swarm, I did get the Overlord speed very early, by the way, as well, to scout around exactly what is going on, to figure out if you get a third base, if he's hiding a gold or whatever. But in Heart of the Swarm, here's the way you deal with any 2-base all-in from Protoss. You basically make a slightly bigger economy than your opponent, knowing that Zerg units in general are less effective. So most of the time you go for like 2 base saturation and then a 3rd base with like 10 drones in there. So you can make just simply more and more units the longer the time goes on, because if you have 50 harvesters and your opponent has 40, you will be able to simply just make more stuff the longer the game goes on. But in Legacy of the Void, I found that to be very, very, very difficult. So right now, I know exactly what my opponent is going for. I've seen the robotics facility. I know that he doesn't have a 3rd base. I found the proxy pylon probe that was hiding and trying to put up a pylon. And I basically am convinced right now that my opponent is indeed gonna go for an all-in. So at this point in time, I haven't invested into a lair yet. I am not going for a super quick lair because it's risky against any kind of earlier adept aggression. And I also did not over-drone the 3rd base. I got only a couple drones there. I'm adding a couple more. But I'm basically getting like the heart of the swarm type of saturation that you need in order to start beating this. Now on top of that, I am just making non-stop units here. I know that my opponent is moving out. I'm great with that. I'm going to be putting my army on top of this ramp, and I actually felt very confident. +1/+1 is not done right now, but I know that I can still buy a little bit of time if I run around with my Zerglings. And once +1/+1 finishes, your army will be significantly stronger. Now you should be having a look at the amount of supply that we get here as well. Very quickly, we will start pushing ahead in supply, and I'm looking around right now trying to figure out what's going on. I found one of the proxy pylons that he did put up. I could have found this a little earlier to try and do it anyway, but honestly he's gonna warp him from a warp prism anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much. I do end up finding it. I did end up sniping that that Zerg or that probe as well. That's putting up the pylon and just making non-stop army right now. +1/+1 is about to finish up. I do go for the lair as well, which I, you know, now looking at the game, maybe should have skipped out, but I'm just trying to make as many units as I possibly can without over-droning, with double upgrades, with making sure that I have a superior economy to my opponent. Even though it's only a couple of workers, I will get more upgrades because I'm actually, you know, trying to beat him with a much bigger army. My opponent allows me to surround his sentries, and he loses pretty much all of them immediately, and I'm okay. I'm like in this position, I'm like, alright, I will win this, right? I will be able to keep up this aggression right now, and even though I should have maybe target fire down the Immortal a little bit sooner, I'm just gonna warp in more and more units. Or not warp in, I'm gonna be morphing in more and more units. Now, Adepts are very, very difficult to judge. When you see Adepts, you think of them as Zealots. Zealots die relatively quickly, but Adepts, generally speaking, don't die at all. So, I'm trying to get a more and more army right now, knowing that my opponent will be mining out his natural and his main base in just a couple of minutes. I felt like I was in an okay place right here. But he starts warping in Adepts, and I just simply don't really have very much to deal with it. So, long story short, I thought I was in a great position, basically using all the tools that I have to try and get the best engagement possible. I get very lucky because my opponent doesn't actually lay down the force fields, and then he just ends up warping in a whole bunch of Adepts, and I end up losing the game. Now, maybe there is something that I'm missing out, okay? I know that there's a lot of pro gamers that instead of going roaches, they've been going for a lot of Ravager play, which is okay as well if your opponent isn't positioning his army so you can land the corrosive bio on top of the army. But all in all, this is basically what my average Zerg vs Protoss has been like, and it's very difficult to beat these kind of strategies. Basically, it's the good old Immortal Sentry all-in, except much stronger. And even with my best defenses, I mean, this was a pretty solid defense. I would have definitely stopped any kind of Immortal Sentry play with this exact play in Heart of the Swarm. But in Legacy of the Void, it feels like you're just gonna be behind for so much longer. I felt like I had everything going here, but it's not really true. Now, like I said, okay, I'm not saying that Adepts are overpowered. I don't like to think that way. I know that there are Zerg players out there on the ladder right now that are performing much better than I am. And Zerg players that are, you know, still in the top of 16 of Grandmaster League and whatnot, you know. So, I am by no means playing perfect. But I do know very well that I am trying my very hardest to find an answer to all-ins like this. And while it doesn't seem like any Zerg player has really found a correct answer to dealing with this sort of aggression yet, it doesn't mean that it won't be found in the next couple of weeks. Now, there are talks right now that the Adept is indeed going to get an HP nerf, because the unit, honestly, is very, very tanky. It's very difficult to kill him. But all in all, I wanted to share this game with y'all so you may be able to understand what this Zerg frustration, and this Terran frustration is a very similar matchup as well, Terran versus Protoss right now, is all about. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. And I want to thank you guys all for watching. Have an amazing day. Do not forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one.